Well, what I start off with is a sort of a thought exercise, and it's a big scale one that helps to set the scene for the entire book. Where I say, imagine a red button on a wall, and all human life depends upon this red button. If you press that button, all human life disappears. Would you press the button?
ManPatria, reason, freedom, uncensored.
When you're paying attention to the pulse of thinking around the world, there is an incredible emphasis on this sort of anti-human ideology these days that says humans are essentially a plague. We are destroying the planet. Everything about us is inherently bad. Earth would be a utopia if we could simply get rid of us. We are the problem. So I turn that into a challenge and I say, if you genuinely believe that, would you put your money where your mouth is, and would you press the button? If you do so, everyone you know, everyone you love, and everyone who has ever lived disappears from the scene, and you solve the humanity problem. To most people, that idea is repulsive, and they say, no, I wouldn't do it. To which I say, congratulations, you are not a worse genocidal maniac than Mao or Stalin. But several things then proceed from that observation, which is, you may not realize it, but you think human beings have inherent value, that we matter. And from that, there follows several things that we have to deal with. We have to eat. We have to have somewhere to live. We have to raise our children so that they can live a little better than us and do better than us and take civilization forward. And as you and I have actually discussed previously, there are only three ways to do that, which are love, trade, or force.
Right.
Now, where we go wrong is love. Socialism is sold as love, but in fact it is better characterized as force. It is not actually an act of love to have a central government agency confiscate wealth and redistribute it. It is better characterized as force. I then make the argument that the superior systems are love and trade, and that the two are incredibly mutually compatible. I also go into some of the fascinating stats from 2019, 2020 that utterly debunk the idea that socialism is the kindly value system or moral worldview. And I'll give you just an example of that one. The United States of America, which remains the wealthiest nation on earth, has the highest charity rates measured both in outright spend, and they come in the top three in terms of interpersonal charity and hours donated to giving. Then the interesting question is, who's last? And the answer to that is the leading socialist nation on earth, China. They are the least charitable nation. And that tells us all sorts of interesting things. The top three most charitable nations, both in terms of outright spend and hours spent in charity, are all free market systems. Right. And the former Soviet socialist nations all rank right at the bottom when it comes to charity. So I spend a little bit of time kind of stirring up the brain, digging into the mind and saying, what do you believe that simply isn't so? And after clearing away those weeds, then we can actually talk about material prosperity.
Right. And now I'm just concerned really, because I mean, I think there's also going to be some sort of resistance towards that. I mean, even if you do bring the evidence to the table, we've seen that a lot of people tend to be a bit dismissive and so forth. So, I mean, how do you deal with that if once you have the facts on your side?
Well, from a personal perspective, my philosophy is if you don't have dislikes on your YouTube video, you're doing something wrong. So I take it that if you are in some way speaking uncomfortable truth, you are going to get backlash. The next question is, how much do you personally care? And perhaps I'm blessed with a bit of a thick skin. I mean, I'm not superhuman. I'm not immune to feedback, but it doesn't bother me on any sort of deep or meaningful level. I believe in speaking the truth more than I believe in popularity. And I think we are, as economist Thomas Sowell often points out, in this incredible battle between kindly sounding intentions versus the real world outcomes. And if we simply switched to measuring the outcomes rather than listening to politicians saying kindly words, we would very easily change our worldview. And my goal, my emphasis and drive, in whatever small way I may contribute, is to doing just that. And I'll take it on the chin if people don't like me.
Oh, okay, no, that's great. That's great, man. Now, all right. So I'm just thinking now. I mean, like we've had a very hectic past few weeks. I mean, we've seen in the international stage what has happened. New presidents coming in, and then the lockdowns and
Orange
all
Man
of
Band
that.
is gone. New woke president, all hail. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, so I mean, we've seen it happen, and I was just very interested to see what the new president would have done. Seems that he cancelled a pipeline that was going to
Yep.
supply people with jobs, and it seems
Yes.
that like a lot of the people that voted for him felt betrayed.
Yes. I mean, it's exactly like that meme suggests. Make the case for Joe Biden without mentioning Donald Trump. Go on. And I think we're seeing a little bit of buyer's remorse, a little bit, a significant amount of buyer's remorse. And I think it will only increase as he is increasingly judged not in the halo of Donald Trump's exodus, but on his own, shall we use the word, merits. And I mean, one of the ones that really bothers me, and what a great example of something that sounds so kind. We're going to help the poor and does so much damage. And people don't understand why it does so much damage. And I mean, you know, you and I can go into a great deal of detail on this, but the simple understanding of that is it raises the gap between absolute poverty and the ability to get onto that first rung.
Right.
And not only does it make it harder to get from here to there, but it also wipes out the group of people who've made it to here. If you are a young student, a young person, someone who's trying to escape from 0 to 1, just getting going, they have taken 1 away. You now have to step up to 2. And the people who are on 1 have had that removed. And I think the results of that are going to be catastrophic. The question, of course, is, does humanity ever learn from these things? And we can shout our lungs out, we can teach people, we can write books about it. But sometimes, unfortunately, our species seems to have to learn the hard way.
Right, and that's another theme. It's seems to be cyclical. It's like, okay, but I think it also has to deal with the fact that human beings also it's also inexperience as well. So, like as they say tough times create strong people and good times create weak people. So now what happens is that the strong people, after seeing the worst of the worst, they try to create the society that works out better. And then the children raised in those ones haven't experienced the bad times. And then it just keeps on going. So I don't know. I mean, it's maybe let's say if human beings can't learn, I don't know if they can't learn, maybe they can. But how do we like at least get to the point where the people that did not grow up or the people that grew up in the good times, how do we teach them that, listen, look, there are bad times. It can get worse, and you need to avoid this somehow.
Yes. In political correctness does more harm than good. I speak about the definition of a dark age, which is really, it's defined by the inability of one generation to transmit values to the next generation. And that, I think, is the problem in a nutshell. Memory is precious, and that is why it is so incredibly important that A, we study and learn from history, and B, perhaps as a even more important category, that we are permitted to speak the truth. There is nothing worse than the sanitizing of history according to modern political correctness, because it removes the lessons. We need history, warts and all. We need to know what every civilization, every group of people has done right and wrong, all of the lessons learnt along the way. And I think what we're trying to do at the moment, and it is dreadfully misguided, is to divide groups and cultures into villains and victors, into the villains and the oppressed. And what that does is it simplifies history down to a caricature from which you cannot learn. And what we need are the warts and all so that we can learn. Where you have prosperous and successful cultures and civilization, you don't just need to know what went right, you need to know what went wrong, what mistakes they made, how they learned from that, and how it evolved over time. Absent that, we do not transmit these values to the next generation, and then we head for trouble in a great big hurry.
Right, and it seems that like now it seems like in South Africa specifically, we're heading down that path quite quickly because I mean, not
definitely
only,
speeding up.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at the lockdown regulations, I mean, the industries that have been shut down, and I mean, some of the regulations were so ridiculous. I mean, like I mean, they even told you which clothes you couldn't buy or which types of food you couldn't buy. It was just
at some point it was as though the government's psychic had consulted with a squirrel on methamphetamines and come up with the next new policy. And, Duma, one of the things I actually talk about in the book is this dwindling tax base in places like South Africa. Last stat that I heard, and this came out after the release of the book, is that we went from 6 million taxpayers down to, I think we're at 2.9 million now.
Are you serious?
And it's mind-blowing. And I ask the honest question. I say, what are the signs that a genuine wealth builder has to pay attention to in terms of whether or not you actually have to emigrate and consider leaving? Right. And I think possibly one of the most serious signs, and this is one that is non-negotiable if you are interested in intergenerational wealth, is this idea. This was proposed and it was bandied about last year. Thank goodness they haven't actually legislated on this one, but it was a serious proposal to get rid of inheritance laws. Yeah. Now, Duma, the second a nation gets rid of inheritance laws that protect private property transmissible from generation to generation, if your goal is intergenerational wealth to make sure that your kids are okay, you cannot live in a nation like that. You simply can't do it because it is impossible to raise your children to that same level of material wealth. And I give an example based in South Africa where I say, imagine a poorer family that have done something like, say, bought a taxi business. They've had to scrimp and save and to work. They've bought themselves a couple of vehicles, and it has been hard work to get that money and get going. Now what happens is they start this process of material increase, and in steps a government that says, we're going to do the kindly thing. We're going to get rid of inheritance. All the money will be pooled and we will distribute it. In one generation, you have wiped out that family. They've gone from poverty to self-made self-sufficiency, back to poverty again. And we know from history that when you start doing this sort of redistributive socialist systems, that it always trends downward. You don't raise the standard to a median average, it always goes down. And I go into great detail in the book in terms of how many nations have failed. Again, spoiler alert, is all of them. And you take places like China, which is now just becoming relatively wealthy. They are becoming wealthy to the degree that they repeal these laws and that they allow this lifeblood of trade. There are some incredibly explicit examples, like New Zealand has got to be the most direct example of all. In somewhere around 1952, they were one of the wealthiest nations in the world by GDP. Then they brought in this incredible sort of socialized leftist nonsense, and they mandated all manner of things in terms of what businesses could and couldn't do, what you could and couldn't buy. The legislation just went berserk, and they fell to the least prosperous of the world's first world nations. Mm-hmm. In comes a guy named Roger Murray, and he simply strips away all of it, and they go to, I think about in the world in terms of material prosperity for GDP. They are the most direct example of how well this works and how badly the opposite works. We know what works and what doesn't in the economic world. The problem is, do we have the political will to follow it?
Right. And talking about that, I mean, I think, you know, what I've observed, which I think is very amazing, is the fact that when you try to get people out of poverty, you need to at least give them some sort of incentive to get out of it, you know. And now we've seen with these redistributive policies, it gives people an incentive to stay poor. And then there's another problem, is that when you do something of that nature, what incentive do you have for people to save? Because that's how wealth is created. You need to save, you know, your wealth. Now, if someone hears that, you know, it doesn't matter when you're 65, the government is just going to give you money. Well, why should I? Yeah. Why should I save? Why should I save for retirement when I'm going to get that money anyway? So therefore, people are going to chase
incentives.
Right. So
yeah,
man, we just need to build the right incentives. I mean, but.
Yes, and you know, you mentioned this idea of saving a little. One of the simplest, but I think most profound ideas in this book is what I just call a little left over, the idea of excess. All wealth building is about a little left over. Karl Marx famously identified this profit margin as the great evil of capitalism, that it wasn't about the work wasn't a problem, the money wasn't a problem, it's the excess left over, and that was where the evil into the. What I do is I point out how that excess is the necessary condition for all innovation. Every life-saving medical procedure you've ever had, every cool toy built by Elon Musk, everything that has ever taken us a half step forward in humanity has been the result of a little excess. You even talk about things like women's liberation and small inventions like the wash machine did more for women's liberation than just about any political movement ever, because it bought time, a little left over, a little more freedom, a little more capacity. I then take that into a proactive wealth building principle, and I say, regardless of how much you're earning, even if it's an incredibly small amount, a little left over is the key to wealth. And I point out this problem of commensurate spending, which really does tend to plague particularly young people. You get a good job, you get your promotion. In line with that, you buy the most expensive car you can get. I know, I've been there, I've done it several times, and I've learned from that one. And what happens is you have nothing left over. Right. So you might be earning 1 million, 10 million rand per annum, but what's happening is your spending is tracking with that. Are you getting richer? No, you simply have more stuff. So the very first proactive wealth building principle is you've just got to tip that scale. If you have 1 rand more coming in than going out every month, you're getting richer. And that's the wealth building formula. Then, of course, we look at sort of clever strategic ways of accelerating. But without that in place, nothing is happening. You're standing still and consuming.
Yeah, that's another thing that we can talk about is the consumption culture. There's a lot of consumerism, and one of the things that socialists like to do is they say, this is why we shouldn't have capitalism, because there's consumerism and people get depressed and they get into debt and all of that. So the government needs to step in and fix that up. I mean, well, what's your thoughts? The
government needs to do something. I'm actually just trying to pull up a book that I've been reading recently. Let me just write Kindle into my phone here. There's a gentleman who passed away toward the end of last year. He was, I think, about 92 years of age, by the name of Sir Rogers Scrutin. And the book, I'm just trying to pull up the cover, and perhaps I can find that as well. Cover of the book is Rogers Scrutin, A Political Philosophy. And I've just been reading that one. He has some interesting insights into exactly the problem that you mentioned there, which is the cudgel with which the left likes to beat capitalists over the head, the consumption problem. And he points out that the impetus beneath that, the core drive that says consumption is a bad thing, is a good impetus. However, it is not something to be solved by government legislation, and that's where they always go wrong. This idea of morally presiding over everyone using the state as the mechanism. And what Scrutin was actually knighted for his services to humanity as a conservative philosopher. So he falls to an interesting part of the political spectrum where he is free trade, but not the conservative values of your place, your people, looking after what you inherit comes first. And while free trade matters to him, it takes a secondary position to the conservation of where you are. And he comes up with an interesting balance there where he says, if you genuinely do believe in conserving your place, your culture, your values, and transmitting those things to the next generation, then you end up with what philosophers used to refer to as this contract between the dead, the living, and the yet unborn. That's a very different way of looking at the world to how we tend to think about it. The consumptive view says, I am here, what can I have? And that is a massively destructive view. If you understand this idea of this three-way contract, you are taking the best of what the previous generations have learned and sacrificed for on our behalf. And you are a faithful custodian of that, and you have to pass it on to the next generation, which also implies you can't simply consume resources around you and pass nothing on to the next generation. A barren wasteland is not a well-conserved environment to pass along. And it's a fairly simple thought, but it's quite a profound one.
Definitely so. Sir Rogers Scrutin, right? I only knew. It was sad. I mean, when I heard he passed away, because I think he had cancer, right? I mean, if I was not mistaken, I remember he put a message on Twitter.
I'm not sure. He was 92 years old, so I think he may have simply died of old age. There's some great videos of him with Jordan Peterson and with Douglas Murray. And listening to Jordan Peterson and Sir Rogers Scrutin talk about existential ideas, it's this like poetry of IQs.
Yes.
These must be some of the most intelligent men to have lived in the past sort of few decades, and wonderful to hear them batting ideas off one another. So Rogers Scrutin coming from the philosophical side, and Jordan Peterson coming predominantly from the side of psychology and how the mind works. But really, really fascinating stuff.
Yeah, I tended to like Jordan Peterson quite a lot. I mean, I used to think, I remember the one time I was at a gathering, and this is before COVID, you know, I was at a gathering. So, and then what
when
happened?
we used to like meet up with people, breathe all over them, like we'd shake hands and kiss and stuff. We were wild.
So I remember I was just speaking to this guy. This is like, and I only heard about Jordan Peterson that time. I wasn't really like into what he was saying. And the guy's like, yeah, you sound a lot like Jordan Peterson. Yeah, you must read that guy. Hey, and then I read him up, and yeah, brilliant guy. I mean, I'm really glad he saw the other side of his struggle. I mean, you know, he was on a drug. I think they call it benzos. And his daughter said he nearly died. And yeah, I mean, that was quite a tough thing, but I'm glad he made it out, man. And now he's alive. He's alive and kicking now. So
alive and kicking and fighting. Yeah, absolutely.
Yes. So yeah, I mean, maybe when everything goes back to normal, he might go on his speaking tours again. I mean, that's one thing.
I hope so. And of course, he's got another new book coming out in his Rules for Life series. In fact, I think it might be out, actually. I must have a look for that one.
Right. Yeah, no, I'll definitely get some time to read that, or maybe he might have a video series as well. But I see he's quite active on social media again. Like I see he's putting out a lot of sponsored content. So yeah, it's good to see him back.
Absolutely.
Yeah, man. Yeah, it's interesting. And also, I mean, there was this one British philosopher. I wouldn't say a philosopher, but he was also like part of like a conservative movement. And I remember there was this one video that was on YouTube, a famous one. I forgot the guy's name.
Hitchens, by any chance?
No, not Hitchens.
No, okay.
I forgot it. He wore glasses, old guy, and I remember he had this very distinct, like, intellectual British accent. And there was a time he was debating a young lady, and the one time, I don't know if you remember this, but there was a time in that debate. It was a very old debate. I think it happened like in 2012. And then in that debate, that young lady was trying to make it sound like as if this guy's a rich guy just trying to get money. And then what he did, he called her out for what she did in the past, because they were supposed to debate somewhere else. And then what she did was she couldn't go to the event because she wasn't going to get paid enough. And then he called her out on that. And then that was a very interesting set of events. And it just reminded me of this whole consumption thing, and also the generational wealth. It seems to me that the young people, in my opinion, they tend, it's almost like they're pissed off at the previous generation. And some of the anger could be founded, but some of it is unfounded as well. But I think it's very much taught in the schooling system. I mean, just the fact that you have some 75% of the youth buying into the most failed idea in human history. What the hell is being taught in the schools these days? It's the most incredible thing. How do you train an entire generation of people to not only not be grateful for what has been transmitted to them, not only fail to acknowledge the incredible achievements of hauling ourselves out of the dark ages to where we are now, but to actually vilify the people who got them there? I mean, it's just absolutely extraordinary. There are so many thoughts we could explore on this one, but the question becomes, how do we get Mr. Marx out of our schools? I'm thinking about it. Every Friday nights, my wife Vanessa and I love to watch horror movies. We like to give ourselves a good scare. And we talk about what we call the brains rule. What happens is, in every horror movie, there's that moment where the goodie gets one up on the monster. And of course, they've hit the monster over the head or whatever. And we're going, brains rule. If you don't see brains, that thing is coming back. And of course, 2 minutes later, back it comes, and it's grabbing them around the ankles. Do you know, Karl Marx in our schools, I mean, we keep thinking we've bashed it over the head and it's dead and gone, but it's the brains rule. We haven't gotten rid of it yet. And it keeps grabbing us into this horrifying monster coming out of the swamp and pulling us back.
right when we least expect it. And we actually have to ask ourselves the question, if we value the next generation, how on earth do we get rid of this psychopathic ideology, and why is it being taught to our children to the extent that, as you rightly point out, they resent the people who have come before them? I even look at things like this Brexit issue.
Yeah.
And I remember an ostensibly intelligent man talking about how the older generation in Britain had voted to leave and the younger generation, by and large, had voted to stay. And he spoke about how selfish the older generation was and how wise the youth were. And I thought to myself, you're talking about the generation that fought the Nazis to regain independence.
Exactly.
They know what goes wrong when someone attempts to rule you from afar, and they made sacrifices to ensure that doesn't happen again. And this idea that, well, obviously the youth know best, and obviously these doddering old fools who just don't want to be ruled from Brussels, what on earth is wrong with them? It's the most incredible thing. But, these are the battles that we wage. And we do the best that we can.
Let's not let's not have an intergenerational war. I mean, the older generation fought one, and now they have to fight another one against their offspring, which is which is the
extraordinary.
Yeah. All right, Douglas. So I'm just wondering, like, from a future perspective, I'm just given what we see now in the world. I mean, what do you expect to see happen this year in terms of economics or social issues and so forth?
Okay. The one that worries me the most is this talk about this great reset. And in that that concept that you keep hearing of you will own nothing and you will be happy.
Right.
Whew, I think that's one of the most dangerous statements I've heard in a very long time. There is always an owner. If the idea is that all of your needs will be supplied by these mega corporations working in conjunction with government under some sort of a bizarre socialist system, who does own? Because somebody owns. And the fewer and fewer people that ownership is concentrated into the hands of, the greater the power imbalances. Maggie Thatcher famously said that what she wanted was to see ownership as broadly dispersed as possible, because that gets rid of these incredible concentrations of government power. It puts the power genuinely back into the hands of people, not the sort of socialist con that says power to the people, which actually means power in the hands of the state. And I've just finished listening to the audiobook of the most depressing book ever written, Alexander Solzhenitsyn's The Gulag Archipelago, that talks about, you hear this dialogue between people who are in a gulag. They have been arrested on a quota arrest system by their own government. They haven't even done anything wrong. It was just quotas. You've got to arrest so many people, put them in the gulag. And they speak about, no, my comrade, this is all ours, this is our government. And it's the most incredible self-delusion. They own nothing. They have no power. Their own government is this almighty God over their heads. And I think that's the thing that troubles me the most. The broader the ownership and the less of it is in the hands of government, the greater freedom. And you must delight incline more to the libertarian worldview these days than I ever did before.
Right.
And the reason for that is the more I see about governments, the more I go, they're the problem. That's the whole problem in a nutshell. Best book I've read on this one in quite some time was called The Tyranny of Experts.
Right.
And it's just this composite study of everything that government's trying to do to help and how all of it does more harm than good. My conservative soul says what you need governments for are the upholding of contracts, the maintenance of law and order, and then basically get out of the way. But yeah, the degree to which people own their own property, their own means of material prosperity, is the degree to which they have freedom. And I think that one is the one that worries me the most. And of course, it's also this sort of vaguely fascistic idea of what is called corporatism. And the fascist notion was that you have the strong government and you have semi-free economies told by the government what to do. They're not owned by the government as in a flat-out Marxist system, but they are told by the government what to do and they partner with government. Now, you hear so much of that kind of talk today, our government is partnering with business. That's terrifying. That's the last thing that you want. When government partners with business, firstly, you have cronyism. Secondly, you have corruption. Thirdly, you have the worst possible inefficiencies in terms of getting things to people. Everything about that is wrong.
Yeah, I agree with that. Especially on the point of cronyism, because I think a lot of people have seen during the lockdowns how big businesses were favored over small ones. We've seen that a lot of these small businesses were in I would call vulnerable industries. When I say vulnerable, I mean in the sense that which ones were going to be most likely locked down. And
yes, vulnerable to the government. Let's be honest about that. I mean, the threat came from government in terms of business continuity.
Yeah, definitely so. And then now going back to the Great Reset, which is also concerning as well. It seems to me that there's this need for greater security, and the essence of freedom is being eroded, and freedom is not being seen as something that's great. In fact, what some will actually believe is that they'll even say that freedom is selfish. I mean, one person put on Twitter the other day, and Big Daddy Liberty retweeted it, and he said that, that tweet
jumped
read,
on it, I hope.
Yeah, no, the tweet actually read that you are being conditioned to believe that that your desire for freedom is selfishness, and that is dangerous. There's this conditioning, so it's not they don't even have to put a cop at your door and put a gun to your head and say, listen, your freedom is selfishness. They've been conditioned.
The virus is up here.
Right.
Absolutely. Yeah. And Duma, we can't overemphasize how profound an idea that is. I mean, if you take great moments in freedom in human history, I mean, one of the very first, and this is as recently, less than 1,000 years ago, which in terms of human history scale is a blink of an eye back. Right. You had the first document signed by an unwilling English king, which limited his own powers. And that was precedent-setting for our species. It was something we had never seen before. And it limited his power. He no longer had the power of life and death arbitrarily over human beings. And that was the beginning of English common law. That ultimately led up to the founding of the US Constitution, which did something I think was miraculous in human history. It said, our starting point is that the human being is inviolable in this relationship with God. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, and that governments derive their just power from the consent of the governed, that those rights exist first, and then afterwards you can build a state around it. That was just a few hundred years ago. Again, blink of an eye in terms of human history. We have spent millennia clawing our rights back from tyrants, monarchs, emperors, chiefs, lords, kings, governments. They are the most dangerous thing for our species by a country mile. And yet here we are saying, oh gosh, if we want to be safe, the first thing we have to relinquish is freedom. Are we insane? Exactly. Do we have no sense of what our species has been through and what really matters to us? And that safetyism is deeply concerning. And of course, to successfully get people to make the government God and to create the scenario in which people give their freedom in order to empower a government, and make no mistake, the empowering of the government is the goal from their perspective, you must teach that incredible thing. And, from my perspective as a Christian, I mean, one of the most repeated verses or ideas from heaven to earth was, do not be afraid. So that one, that's at the core of everything for me, that idea of fear versus freedom, and this idea, do not be afraid. It is so important. It gives me goosebumps just to sort of think about where we are in human history and how badly wrong this can go if we don't fight for this precious concept.
Right. And it's funny how fear actually controls us. Like it's one of the weirdest things. I had a discussion with, again, and this was during the lockdown. I was at a little gathering, and yes, we did the social distancing and whatever. And then what happened was I had a discussion with a friend who was telling me about how fear actually controls most of us without even knowing. And now it seems that, because I don't know if that's just a set human condition or if that's just of something that is actually conditioned into us. I don't know.
Yes.
But it seems that the government knows how to use that very well. I mean, I saw with Kamala Harris and Mike Pence in their debates, and one of the things that that Kamala Harris stated about the healthcare system, they said, well, if you don't vote for us, these guys are going to take your healthcare system away. They're going to take it away. They're going to take it away from you. And it's just, and
if you don't vote for me, you ain't black, and so on. It's all, it's just like manipulative, but like so obviously manipulative.
Exactly.
If you don't do what I say, a bunny will die. It's incredible. Yeah, but thinking about that whole thing, and they certainly do play on that. We joke. I mean, I used to work as a professional speaker when there was a professional speaking industry, right. And there's a joke that sort of does the rounds among professional speakers about how fearful people are of public speaking. And when they do surveys, they ask people, "What is your number one fear?" And death typically comes second, and public speaking tops the list. And when you dissect that, it's not the speaking itself. What it is, it's the fear of judgment. And I think that is an inroad to understanding a great deal about human fear. I think we are less scared of the proverbial tiger at the cave door, or right. even the super germ doing the rounds, than we are of the disapproval of other people. And there's great danger in that, because it makes us easily manipulable. We are social creatures. We do care about what other people think. And that is both a good thing, it's a human thing, and it is a great weakness if we allow it to be used against us.
Right, definitely so. I think that sums it up very well, in my opinion, because it's just one of those things that happen. All right, Douglas. Look, I think I don't know if there's anything else you want to mention, but what is it? Is there anything else that you want to speak about?
Well, no, just in terms of the book itself, just to let you know, I'm working on the Audible version at the moment, which is incredibly challenging from home because the da makes a noise, or the dustbin truck goes by outside. I have to stop recording and start again. But in the next couple of weeks or so, that should go live on Audible as well. And in the interim, this book and the previous one, the political correctness one, do link up. So in this one, this How to Grow Rich, I debunk ideas like Thomas Piketty and this idea of the top 1%, how they are accumulating capital, and that capital helps them to stay atop society. I debunk that one 6 ways from Sunday. And that, of course, then links into the content for Political Correctness Does More Harm Than Good. So this, in a sense, is a debunking of terrible wealth ideas, which relates to the debunking of PC ideas in general. This, however, then goes into proactive wealth-building territory and shows people who are interested in setting up a prosperous life how to think about that and what steps they can practically take. And that's the whole idea.
Perfect. All right, then. And then this is a perfect segue for like the end of the show. So you know how it goes. At the end of the show, we always give the guest an opportunity to take the floor to say whatever they want. So, cool. Douglas, what is it that you want to say?
I want to say, eat your vegetables, children. I am Potato Man. Okay, I've clearly been watching too much Peppa Pig with my 3-year-old. All right, let's do a more serious version of that. There's nothing about tomorrow. Tomorrow, in terms of human society, where we go, what we achieve, how we live, is really entirely up to us, and we have the option to create it. Now, here's the great part. Generations that came before us have handed us light. They have handed us a torch. They have handed us a map for figuring out the problems that we face. None of the problems we face today are any different to the problems that have been faced before. They are different in terms of complexity. We've added technology to it, but the core principles, the fundamentals, remain the same. We can walk out, we can step out in darkness, or we can take the map with us. I propose we learn from history, take the map with us, and teach our children how they can live a little better than we did using the lessons from the past. The best form of contract is between the dead, the living, and the next generation. We learn from the past, we take that precious light, we hand it on to the future. That's the best way to live.
All right, Douglas. Thanks a lot for that.
Only a pleasure. Thank you very much for having me. I really appreciate it. I love having chats with you. It's good fun.
Always a pleasure.